Brennan, and this week I'm doing interviews from the United Astrology Conference with different astrologers and different people that are speaking at the conference in order to get a sense for what kind of talks are happening and just get a general sense for the community and where it is at today. So joining me today is my friend Kenneth Miller. Kenneth Miller, thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
We are old friends from Kepler College from over a decade ago, where we both studied the Eastern and Western astrological traditions.
Back when you could get an academic degree.
Right,
Yes.
those were the days.
Those were the days.
10 years ago,
Yeah.
before it was taken from us. So luckily, both of us were able to get degrees from
Yes.
that program before it closed. You actually got a master's degree from Kepler, right?
One of the few, yes.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay. And you specialize primarily, or your primary background is in Vedic astrology, right?
Correct.
Okay. So, and that's actually the topic, or that's partially the topic of your talk here at the conference, right?
Right. So first, let me back up a minute and say that I prefer the term Indian astrology.
I do too, actually. I was using Vedic, so maybe that's actually a good thing to explain
Start with.
why.
Yes. So my reason for that is that the Jyotish, or the astrology of India, is done by everyone in India, not just Hindus. So the Vedas, the holy books of the Hindus, they mention astrology. Well, let me back up a minute. Calling it Vedic astrology to me is like calling Western astrology biblical astrology.
Okay.
Because is there astrology in the Bible? Yes, there is. Can you teach yourself astrology from the Bible? No, you can't. And it's the same with the Vedas. There is astrology in them, but you can't teach from them.
So there's so little astrology in the Vedas that it's misleading to call it Vedic astrology
Well,
in that sense?
I don't want to use all of our time to go off topic,
This,
but I mean,
two
there is
hours
an important,
later.
astrology plays an important role in the timing of traditional Hindu rituals.
Okay.
Which is why it's considered kind of part of an adjunct to Vedic study.
Mm-hmm.
That said, Buddhists do this astrology, Sikhs do this astrology, Jains do this astrology, and they don't hold the Vedas as holy books. So
Okay.
to me, calling it Vedic astrology skews it in a certain direction. So I find Indian astrology, because it's the astrology that I've met followers of Islam that do this kind of astrology
Sure.
in India. So
It's kind of like, I guess even worse than is sometimes it's referred to occasionally, especially in older books from 10 or 20 years ago, as like Hindu astrology,
Yes.
which you run into the same issue.
yeah, I mean, it's
Okay.
certainly the astrology of Hindus, but it's also the astrology of other people, Indian
Sure.
peoples.
So what is the title of your talk at the conference?
That is a really great question. I'll paraphrase the title of the talk, 'cause I don't remember it exactly, but it's
Okay.
something like the transmission of ancient astrological information between Egypt and India, or India and Egypt. I'm not saying it's one direction or the other. And basically, I'm looking at essentially Hellenistic Egypt, Roman-controlled Egypt. It's the Egypt of, about 2,000 years ago.
Okay, so you're looking at that interaction that occurred historically between the ancient Egypt or ancient Roman Empire at the time and the Indian subcontinent
Yes.
at the time.
Because as you know, Chris, horoscopic astrology, or the idea of casting a chart for when someone was born, thrives both in the Hellenistic and then Roman Empire and in India, for reasons we can do another talk about. But and so there's been this debate about, well, who came up with that idea first? And traditional Western scholarship has said, well, clearly it was the Greek-speaking peoples, and they passed it on to India, and then India developed it. So I'm going to push back on that a bit using some of the latest research in archaeology and historical research and new textual stuff. I'm going to push back on that argument because it's more complicated.
Sure. So over the past few decades, the trend in like Western scholarship with people like David Pingree has been pushing more of the argument that Indian astrology, or at least Indian horoscopic astrology, came from the
Yes.
West, or came from the Greeks, and was transmitted in a Greek text known as the Jataka, and then it merged or synthesized with the indigenous Indian tradition,
Yes.
and then created everything else.
Yes.
But you want to push back on that narrative a little bit. You feel like that narrative goes a little bit too far?
Yes, and he gives 3 reasons for why he thinks that's the case. The third reason is that astrology is so weird and strange that it would be inconceivable that multiple cultures would come up with that idea. That it must have been one crazy culture that came up with it and then spread that nutty idea around. Now, this is
Sure.
in his own writings. He says this.
Sure.
So if that's your framework and you're filtering all the information from the point of view of, well, it must have traveled this way, then that's all you see. So I'm going to tell a different story to sort of push back on that narrative and lead a trail from India back to Alexandria.
Sure. So, I mean, give me the short version of, for just that one point, I mean, what is so objectionable about that point? Because I think, Pingree's argument is partially that some of these techniques are so complex and so convoluted or like abstract that somebody must have invented them at some point, and it's unlikely that some other guy in a separate culture would have come up with the same exact technique. You think that argument, that there's a way in which you could argue that they could have?
Yes, I mean, it's not ironclad. I'm not going to say that I'm changing the game. I'm just saying it's more nuanced, because think about it. If you live in an environment that tells you you've had past lives and you've had previous karmas, and part of why you're on this planet again is you're working out new karma, you want a technology that's going to tell you, well, what is that karma exactly? And
Sure.
horoscopic astrology answers that question in the Indian context.
Right.
They were already watching the sky. They were already paying attention to the moon. They were already timing their rituals. They were already selecting auspicious lunar days. I'm greatly simplifying things, but to do things, what we'd call maybe like a proto-electional astrology. There was already some omenology with planetary stuff, and this is like new information. And it would only take one conversation to go, hey, let's calculate an ascendant between two people to realize, oh my God, that's such a great idea. Why haven't we been doing that?
Sure.
Whether that happened in India or happened in Alexandria or somewhere in between. It's not ironclad. Like that, I'm just pushing back on this ironclad. It comes all the way
Right.
down, and I'm going to demonstrate what I feel is like a separate transmission from Babylon to India that I think has been undervalued.
Okay.
And that information, and because there's trade between these people going way back, and what gets left out of these stories is how the Indians were all over the place. Black pepper, and I'll be talking about this briefly in my talk, originates in Kerala, which is a southern state in India, and everyone loves pepper, and it goes everywhere, and it's found in embalmed pharaohs that get dug up in Egypt, going back 1,000 or more years. At the time period we're talking about, Pliny the Elder is complaining that so much of Rome's money is being spent on the Indian spice trade. At the time of the Yavana-Jataka-ish, there was a ship leaving from Rome to India every 3 days.
Wow. Okay, so it wasn't just, part of your point is that it's not just like ships going from Egypt, from the Roman Empire to India, but there was
Right.
plenty that was coming
Yes.
back from India to
Yes.
the Hellenistic
And
the
an
Greek world.
exciting, which muddies the water even more, kind of an exciting new archaeological find is it looks like there may have actually been a community in Alexandria of Indians,
Okay.
because they have found memorial and what we call tombstones that are have Buddhist iconography, and clearly were Indian stuff. And then
Wow.
there's records of Indians being there.
Okay.
So there was a lot more even more interaction than I was taught 10 years ago when I first started studying this stuff.
Sure. Yeah, and there's so much in the Yavana Jataka, which is always like the primary piece of evidence for the transmission of Hellenistic astrology to India. There's already so much there that doesn't make sense
Right.
from a Greek
Right.
perspective that seems to be like unique
Yes.
Indian contributions that you could already, I'm sure that's part of.
Yeah, that will be part of my argument when I'll be deconstructing that text and just showing how, again, Pingree was thinking it has to be flowing in this direction, therefore this India stuff must have been added, which really makes no sense. If you just imagine for a minute that maybe the information's traveling the other way, then it's like, oh, I can see now where part of this might have been transmitted in the other direction. It was probably a blend, but I'll get into that on my talk.
Brilliant. Awesome. Well, that should be good. What else do you have going on? I saw that you have a new paper out that's published in the new Ascendant
Yeah,
Journal.
the new Ascendant Journal, it's called Pluto's Weird History, and it's the history of Pluto in astrology from its, actually from before it was found, because oddly astrologers were predicting there would be a Pluto, and I look at its very weird history. Now that, some of your listeners might be like, well, what's weird about it? Pluto's like a bad thing and the transits are terrible. It wasn't always like that, and that's what's weird. You had very prominent astrologers with decades of experience saying, this planet doesn't do anything.
Okay.
And I trace this kind of unspoken history of Pluto, and it's nicely illustrated. They really did a good job, actually, and it's in the Ascendant.
Yeah, I saw it in the bookstore. I'm going to pick up a copy. It looks really beautiful.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm interested in that. And so just tracing the origins of how Pluto came to mean what it means today in the astrological
Absolutely,
community.
yeah.
And that's
And I'll
much
just give
more-
you one quick little gem.
Sure.
So most modern astrologers will associate like elimination with Pluto.
Okay.
And bathroom functions with Pluto.
Mhm.
Well, at the time of Pluto's discovery, if you were to say to someone on the street the word Pluto, the first thing that would pop into their mind is America's best-selling laxative, Pluto water.
Okay.
So that was like the best, for decades it was the best-selling laxative.
Okay.
It was called Pluto water, and I show like how that how that cultural phenomenon gets dialed into the Pluto experience.
Okay.
But that's just one of many like weird little things that happens to Pluto in its journey. And we talk about the astronomy, and everything is in that thing.
Brilliant.
Soup to nuts. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to checking that out.
Yeah, the whole magazine is great. I mean, there's a bunch of great articles in there, and I'm just proud to be one of them.
Sure. I'll have to put a link to it in the description for this video.
Yes.
So where can people find out more information about your work?
They can eventually go to www.celestialintelligencer.net, although at the moment it is being redesigned, so you'll just get a work in progress screen. I can be emailed at kenneth@celestialintelligencer.net, and I'm sure you'll put that in the comments below.
Definitely.
Yeah, I teach for Kepler College. I've got some other things going on, but yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for joining me today.
Always a pleasure, Chris. Always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, that's it for this video. So if you liked it and you want to see more videos from UAC, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, and there'll be more updates during the course of the week. So thanks for watching.
Thank you.